Look, to get into the topic, I want straight away to make this point. I suppose in approaching the topic, which is this motion that the House would believe in God, we have to check out for ourselves what's the kind of reasoning, what's the kind of approach, what's the kind of attitude we have in coming to this topic. And I want to suggest there are two attitudes which we can have, and we need to distinguish them. One is what's called instrumental reasoning. Instrumental reasoning has given us so much. It's given us that kind of calculative way of sorting things out in scientific methodologies that gives us great breakthroughs in medicine. We all use the mechanics. We have them, the iPhones. Brilliant. That's instrumental reasoning. Instrumental reasoning doesn't go into the questions of the whys and wherefores of the bigger questions. Let's call that more radical kind of reasoning. The radical reasoning which goes to the root issues of what it is to be human, how we are made, for what we are made. And C.S. Lewis, the scholar who many years ago wrote so many books, in his famous book, The Abolition of Man, made the point that we'd be careful that we don't enter into a Faustian bargain whereby we end up, as it were, giving ourselves over to instrumental reason, but at the cost of setting out on this more radical reasoning, which he would say loses our soul. My proposal to you, therefore, this evening is this, that in one way or another, in terms of the radical reasoning that each of us deep down has, we can, I think, reach a point of agreement. That there is an openness towards, and ultimately an intuitive sense of, in broad parameters, that which we call God. I'm not saying necessarily the Christian God, or this God, or the other God, but a God, because that's the motion, a God. Now, the point is, from classical philosophers, right back in 500 BC, right through to the modern philosophers, take Emmanuel Levinas, the Jewish philosopher, we find a universal recognition that each person, in a sense, is a hostage to the other. In other words, each person is directed towards the other. That's our nature, that's our identity. And that directedness ultimately veers towards an absolute. It ultimately veers towards what we might call the transcendent, the mystery. And the point is this. We risk, if we don't accept that, or at least acknowledge it, being dehumanized. Because to be human is to be more than simply technically human, if you get my point. To be human is actually to be beyond our own individuality. It's to be projected towards the others, but even in that, intuitively towards the other, in some way, whatever form you call it. We get it right through in all then the philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, and I'm not talking here about necessarily religious theistic tradition, of which I'm a member of. Obviously, a theist believes in a personal God. I'm not even saying that that's necessarily what I'm arguing for this evening. All through those philosophical lines, even in terms of the non-religious theistic tradition, the greatest philosophers, greatest minds, right up to the Western thinkers, Kant, Hegel, Schelling, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Derrida, they grapple with this directedness. So, why, the question, is there deep down in us? And Wittgenstein puts it this way. It's not a question of how things are in this world. Rather, the mystery is that the world exists. It raises a question for us. Or another philosopher, Eoin MacLachlan, Irish but philosopher in America, Notre Dame, he puts it this. Look, there's something science can't, it's not a question rather of saying, look, there's something science can't explain and we call that God. That's not the point. What's being postulated here is a reason why there should be anything at all for physics to study in the first place. In other words, the very fact of the world, the very fact of being inserted in this world points to something. Now, of course, people do raise objections to that. Suffering, evil, the problems that we see around us many days, and they are challenges, I'm not going to deny that. The Christian response is, and people like Thomas Aquinas, what God wills happens. What he doesn't will to happen doesn't happen. But there is a distinction. God can permit things to happen because he gives free will. And you know, parents know that. Parents can see their son or daughter, they would really love for them to do something different, but they know at a certain point in life they have to give them the freedom to make their choices. The ultimate, the absolute in terms of what I'm talking about, from my perspective, can, even though it's mysterious, have an explanation in that kind of sense as well. That a radical freedom has been given to humanity of choice. And that choice is infinite, ultimately. Now, the third, final part of what I want to put forward to you is this. I can talk about all the theory, we could all talk about the theory. But the fact is, throughout the whole world, the vast majority of people give evidence of the fact that they believe in some form of God. From the Lascaux caves in France, with all the paintings, to right over into all the Hindu Vedic writings, right throughout the whole majority do point to evidence of a belief in a transcendent, a mystery, an absolute. But we bring it right back to the personal experiences. I want to take two or three. Etty Hillesum. She was a young Jewish girl, not really practicing her faith, wasn't into her faith much. She ended up in the Westerbork concentration camp in North Holland. It would have been possible for her to escape, but she said no, she'd keep with her family. She was eventually murdered in Auschwitz in 1943. And here she wrote beautiful letters and diaries, which we have, which are kept. And she says this when she's in prison, the concentration camp. People are still hieroglyphs up to me. I'm trying to understand them. And be gradually learning to decipher them. To read life from people. And then she goes on to say, my life has become an uninterrupted dialogue with you, O God. One great dialogue. Sometimes I stand in the corner of the camp, my feet planted on the earth, my eyes raised towards the heaven, tears come down my face, tears of deep emotion and gratitude. My life is one great dialogue with you. Sometimes I try my hand at turning out small profundities on certain short stories, but I always end up with one word, God. And that says everything. There's no more for anything else. Etty somehow had pierced through the mystery of life, even though she started herself quite agnostic, to an ultimate source. Eddie, a young man I knew, had muscular dystrophy. He cheered people up, even though he was himself dying, with the recognition that there is a God. Another, Carol Lucci, said at the end of her life to her mother, she was dying, she was recently beatified by the Catholic Church. She was only 18 years of age. Mom, be happy. I'm happy. The happiness she had got from knowing there is a God. I propose the motion. Thanks very much.